The sun wasn't just shining, it was leaning on the doorbell, holding a blowtorch and refusing to leave. This was day 5 of the Great Searing of 25, a heatwave so profoundly disrespectful that the local news had run out of adjectives and had started using stock footage of volcanic eruptions. The air in Maple Creek Estates wasn't air anymore. It was a hot, wet towel that someone had used to wipe down a feverish giant. My own lawn, which I was legally obligated by Covenant 14.7c to keep at a pleasing and uniform emerald hue, had given up and was now the color of a depressed manila folder. I was seeking refuge in my garage, the one place on the property that was truly mine. My late grandparents had left me this house, a perfectly nice, if aggressively beige, slice of the American dream. I'd cashed out of my soul-crushing tech startup. We'd designed hyper-efficient cooling systems for server farms, the irony of which was currently making me want to scream, and moved here for peace, quiet, and a distinct lack of 2 a.m. emergency calls about an overheated mainframe in Omaha. The garage was my sanctuary. It smelled of motor oil, hot metal, and potential. Schematics for a self-leveling pool table were taped to one wall, next to the half-assembled guts of a vintage pinball machine I was retrofitting with a Raspberry Pi. I was tinkering with an old oscillating fan, trying to coax another half-mile-per-hour of breeze out of its wheezing motor, when I first saw the shimmer of hope at the end of my street. It was a simple pop-up tent, erected in the middle of the small, circular park that served as the neighborhood's green centerpiece. A few neighbors I recognized from their brisk, disapproving power walks were gathered underneath it. They'd run an extension cord from the park's lamppost to power a couple of fans, and had set out coolers filled with ice and bottled water. It was a beautiful, simple act of community kindness. I saw Mrs. Gable, the sweet 80-year-old widow from 2 doors down, sitting in a folding chair, fanning her face, a look of profound relief on her features. Her ancient central air unit had died on day 2 of the heat wave, and a replacement was a week out. This little tent was, for her, an oasis. I smiled. Maybe the suburban thing wouldn't be so bad after all. Maybe beneath the manicured lawns and the passive-aggressive newsletters, there was a heart. Then I saw her. Brenda. She wasn't walking. She was processing. Brenda, the self-appointed queen of Maple Creek Estates and the lifelong president of its homeowners association, moved with the unyielding certainty of a Terminator striding out of a fire. She was in her mid-50s, with a haircut you could use as a straight edge and an expression that suggested she'd just smelled something foul and suspected it was you. In her hand, she clutched her weapon of choice, a thick 3-ring binder, its plastic cover worn from years of being weaponized against joy. The bylaws. I watched from my driveway, the half-repaired fan forgotten in my hands. This was better than television. Brenda marched directly to the center of the small gathering, her orthopedic sandals making no sound on the scorched grass. The cheerful chatter under the tent faltered and died. "Excuse me," Brenda announced, her voice carrying across the shimmering heat. It wasn't loud, but it had the piercing quality of a smoke alarm. "What is this?" A man I recognized as Bill from across the street, a perpetually cheerful guy who always waved, stepped forward. "Hi, Brenda. It's just a cooling station. For anyone who needs it. It's a real scorcher today." Brenda did not return the greeting. She opened her binder. The snap of the rings echoed like a gunshot in the still air. "This," she declared, "is an unsanctioned gathering. The park bylaws, Section C, Paragraph 4, expressly forbid any temporary structures without prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee, of which, as you know, I am the chair." Bill blinked. "It's a tent, Brenda. It's for Mrs. Gable." He gestured towards the elderly woman who was now looking worried. Brenda's eyes scanned the scene with cold, analytical precision. Furthermore, she continued, you are using community electricity for personal appliances, a violation of Section F, Paragraph 9. The coolers represent a potential liability risk, and this entire setup is, frankly, aesthetically displeasing. It lowers the tone of the neighborhood. It's 104 degrees out, another woman protested. Brenda's gaze fell upon her. It was a look that could curdle milk. The temperature is not a recognized exemption in the bylaws. This is a private community with standards. We are not a refugee camp. The words hung in the thick, hot air, stunningly cruel. One by one, the small group, conditioned by years of Brenda's tyrannical rule, began to deflate. The fight went out of them. With shamed, defeated expressions, they started unplugging the fans and folding the chairs. Brenda stood, arms crossed, binder tucked under one arm, observing the dismantling of decency with a thin, satisfied smile. The worst part was watching Mrs. Gable. She pushed herself up from her chair, her face flushed, her breathing shallow. She looked smaller, more fragile than she had just moments before. Bill offered to walk her home, but she waved him off with a weak, proud gesture. I watched her take slow, shuffling steps back toward her house, the merciless sun beating down on her. Something inside me snapped. It was a clean, audible break. The part of my brain that had been enjoying a peaceful, early retirement was suddenly recommissioned and put on a war footing. My engineering instincts, my hatred of bullies, and my profound, deep-seated love for malicious compliance all converged in a single, brilliant flash of inspiration. Brenda had her bylaws. She had her binder and her iron will. I had a TIG welder, a fully stocked workshop, and a 1972 Airstream Sovereign that had been waiting patiently for its moment of glory. I retreated into my garage, the rage a cold, clear fuel in my veins. Brenda wanted to shut down a cooling center? Fine. I'd give her a cooling center she could never shut down. My rage had a 3-minute fuse. The project itself would take a little longer. I flicked on the industrial overhead lights. The old Airstream, a beautiful aluminum land yacht, gleamed under the glare. It was a project I'd inherited with the house, a dusty relic I was going to restore someday. Well, someday was now. The next 3 hours were a blur of controlled chaos. I was no longer a retired tech nerd. I was a man possessed. First, the gutting. The shag carpet, smelling faintly of a bygone era and regret, was ripped out. The kitchenette, with its avocado green formica, was unbolted and hauled onto the driveway. I needed space. Next, the power. The trailer's original wiring, installed by a squirrel with a grudge, was bypassed. I rolled out the beast, a 10,000-watt quiet inverter generator I'd bought for a Burning Man project that never materialized. I mounted it securely on the reinforced tongue, its red casing a bold statement of intent. From there, I ran heavy 4-gauge copper to a new sub-panel inside the trailer, a professional-grade setup that could power a small nation, or at least a very enthusiastic rock band. Then came the main event. In the corner of my garage, under a dusty tarp, were 2 industrial-grade portable air conditioning units. These weren't the dinky little window shakers you buy at a hardware store. These were behemoths, designed to keep a room full of million-dollar servers from melting into slag. Each one could pump out 36,000 BTUs of pure, frosty bliss. I'd acquired them when my old company had upgraded its facilities. They were my babies. With a grunt and an engine hoist, I maneuvered the first unit into the trailer's main doorway. I fabricated a custom steel mount, cutting and welding with a surgeon's focus. The second unit was trickier. I cut a clean, precise hole in the side of the Airstream, an act that felt both sacrilegious and deeply satisfying, and mounted the second unit there, sealing it against the elements with thick gaskets and a frightening amount of silicone. I didn't stop there. I climbed onto the roof and installed a commercial-grade misting system, the kind you see on restaurant patios in Scottsdale. A 100-gallon water tank I'd planned to use for a rainwater collection system was repurposed and secured over the axles, feeding a high-pressure pump that would atomize the water into a cooling fog. I rewired the original exterior lights and added a string of festive, shatter-proof LEDs under the large retractable awning. I bolted a power strip with a dozen outlets and USB ports to the interior wall, labeling it Community Charging Station. The final touch was the most important. With a can of white spray paint and a stencil I cut by hand, I emblazoned a title on the gleaming aluminum side in big, friendly 2-foot-high letters, Community Climate Trailer. I stood back, covered in sweat, grease, and a fine dusting of 50-year-old insulation. It was monstrous. It was glorious. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever built. I hitched the rolling Arctic Tundra to my pickup truck, the trailer's suspension groaning under the new weight. I rolled it slowly, majestically, down the street. I parked it on the public road, directly adjacent to the park, in the exact spot where the sad little tent had been vanquished. I checked the city parking regulations on my phone. I was more than 15 feet from any intersection or fire hydrant. My registration was current. I was perfectly, unimpeachably legal. With a deep sense of ceremony, I pulled the starter cord on the generator. It purred to life with a low, confident hum. I flipped the breakers on the sub-panel. The 2 giant AC units roared to life, and a blast of air, so cold it felt like it had been imported directly from the dark side of the moon, billowed out of the trailer's open door. I deployed the awning and switched on the misters, which hissed into action, creating a shimmering curtain of delightful fog. I pulled a lawn chair from my truck bed, placed it squarely in the bubble of 68-degree air, cracked open a can of sparkling water, and waited. It took less than 5 minutes. Brenda appeared at the end of the street. At first, she was just walking her poodle, an anxious-looking creature named Sir Reginald. Then she stopped, her head tilted. I could practically see the cognitive dissonance playing out on her face. She saw the trailer. Her brain tried to categorize it and failed. Her pace quickened. Sir Reginald was practically airborne, dragged along by a suddenly taut leash. She came to a halt about 10 feet from my lawn chair, her mouth slightly agape. Her eyes darted from the humming generator to the massive AC units, to the bold lettering on the side. "What?" she began, her voice a strangled whisper. "Is that?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. "That?" I said, gesturing with the can. "That's the Brenda wouldn't let us have a tent, so I built a rolling Arctic Tundra model. It's a working title." I gave her my most serene, untroubled smile. "It's legally parked, registered with the DMV, and fully insured. The generator is under the 60 decibel limit for residential areas as per City Ordinance 9.24.080. Anything else?" Brenda's face went through a fascinating spectrum of colors, starting at confused beige, moving through irritated pink, and finally settling on a deep, volcanic magenta. She fumbled for her binder, which she'd somehow managed to bring with her on a dog walk. She began flipping through pages with frantic energy. This is a commercial vehicle. You can't operate a business here," she sputtered, stabbing a finger at a page. "I'm not operating a business," I said calmly. "There's no money changing hands. I'm just enjoying my recreational vehicle. It happens to be very, very well air-conditioned. Would you like a bottle of water? I have spring and mineral." These modifications," she stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the AC units. "They are not standard. They are an eyesore. This is a violation of the aesthetic covenants." "It's a vintage Airstream," I countered, leaning back in my chair. They're famous for being customized. Besides, the aesthetic covenants apply to permanent structures on private property. This is a licensed vehicle on a public street. Your authority, Brenda, ends at the curb. I punctuated the statement with another sip of water. The look on her face was a masterpiece of impotent rage. It was like watching a supervillain whose doomsday device had just been unplugged. She knew I was right. She could see the legal force field I had erected around my creation, and it was driving her insane. She snapped her binder shut. "I am going to find a rule you are breaking. Mark my words," she hissed. She yanked on Sir Reginald's leash and stormed off, her furious footsteps the only sound besides the gentle hum of my generator and the glorious roar of the air conditioners. My little stunt did not go unnoticed. First came the kids. A small gang of them, aged 6 to 10, appeared on their bikes, drawn by the strange humming and the visible cloud of mist. They stared at the trailer with wide, reverent eyes, as if the mothership had landed. "Whoa," one of them breathed. "What is it?" "It's a cooling center," I said. "Hop off your bikes. The misters are the best part." They abandoned their bikes in a heap on the grass and ran, shrieking with delight, through the curtain of cool fog. Within minutes, the area under my awning was transformed into an impromptu water park. Their parents soon followed, drawn by the sound of happy children not complaining about the heat. They approached cautiously at first, then gratefully, sinking into the extra lawn chairs I'd set up. Then I saw Mrs. Gable. She was walking slowly toward the trailer, holding a folded newspaper over her head as a makeshift sun shield. "Mrs. Gable!" I called out, jumping up. "Come on over, I saved you a seat." She looked at me, then at the trailer, a hesitant smile on her face. "Oh, dear boy," she said, her voice soft. "I saw it from my window. Is this for us?" "This is for anyone who's tired of melting," I said, leading her to the most comfortable chair, positioned directly in the path of the main AC unit. "I believe this is the best seat in the house." She sat down, and a deep, contented sigh escaped her lips as the cold air washed over her. "Oh, my word," she whispered, fanning her face out of habit before realizing she didn't need to. "It's like heaven." She looked at me, her eyes twinkling. "You're the young man from the Petersons' old house, aren't you? The engineer?" "That's me, Alex." "Well, Alex," she said, patting my hand, "you're a troublemaker. And thank goodness for that." Just as the party was getting started, a man in his late 60s with a kind face and a mischievous glint in his eye ambled over from the house next to mine. He was carrying a glass pitcher, sweating with condensation. It was George, the retired history teacher. "I figured the commander of this Arctic expedition could use some reinforcements," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. He held up the pitcher. "Fresh squeezed lemonade, my wife's secret recipe. It pairs well with righteous indignation." "George, you're a lifesaver," I said, finding him a cup. He took a slow look around, at the kids playing, at Mrs. Gable holding court, at the gleaming, humming trailer. A wide grin spread across his face. "This," he said, with the gravity of a man unveiling a monument, "is a work of art, a masterpiece of malicious compliance. You've done in 3 hours what we've been trying to do for 10 years. Wipe that smug look off Brenda's face." He took a sip of his own lemonade and leaned against the trailer. "But be careful, son," he warned, his tone turning serious. "That woman's got more bylaws memorized than I have bad memories of the 70s. And that's saying something. She doesn't lose. When the Millers wanted to plant a Japanese maple, a beautiful tree, by the way, she found a sub-clause in the approved foliage list that classified it as a non-conforming ornamental, and fined them until they dug it up. "She's that dedicated?" I asked, a little shocked. "Dedicated?" George chuckled without humor. "She lives for it. Her husband travels for work 90% of the time. Her kids are grown and gone. This HOA, this is her kingdom. The binder is her crown. She was a paralegal for a nasty corporate law firm for 30 years before she retired. She knows how to use rules as a weapon. Remember the great wind chime purge of '09? That was her doing. Said they violated the auditory aesthetic of the neighborhood. It was a dark time, a very quiet, dark time. The history lesson was illuminating. This wasn't just a random power trip, it was Brenda's entire identity. I wasn't just fighting a grumpy neighbor, I was challenging a queen in her own court. "Thanks for the warning, George," I said. "I'll be careful." "Oh, I know you will," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "But I have a feeling you're the kind of troublemaker this neighborhood has been waiting for." As if on cue, a pristine white patrol car, the kind that always seems to be driving 5 miles under the speed limit, turned onto our street. It slowed to a crawl as it approached the climate trailer. It was the inevitable escalation. Brenda had called in the cavalry. The patrol car pulled up and parked behind my truck. 2 officers got out. The first was a man in his late 40s, with a thick, weary mustache and eyes that had seen every type of suburban squabble imaginable. He moved with the heavy resignation of a man who knew his day was about to get dumber. This was Officer Miller. His partner was younger, barely out of his 20s, with shiny boots and a fresh-faced, earnest expression that was about to be severely tested. Officer Davis. The small crowd around the trailer went quiet. The parents gathered their children closer. Mrs. Gable looked nervous again. This was exactly the kind of intimidation Brenda was counting on. Officer Miller ambled over, his partner a step behind him. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes doing a slow, methodical scan of the scene. He looked at the trailer, at the industrial AC units, at the generator, at the crowd of people, and finally at me, sitting in my lawn chair. He sighed, a deep, profound sound of existential exhaustion. "Afternoon," he said, his voice flat. "Officer," I said, giving him a polite nod. "Is there a problem?" "Don't know yet," he said, pulling out a notepad. "Sir, we received a complaint about an unauthorized atmospheric modification vehicle." He looked down at his notes, then back up at me, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. "It's an RV with a good AC," I said, trying to keep my tone helpful. "Is that a crime in this neighborhood?" "Just doing my job, sir," he droned. He walked around the entire rig. His partner Davis followed, trying very hard to look professional, and mostly failing. I saw his lips twitch when he read the lettering on the side. Miller stopped at the generator. "Noise complaint was part of it." "It's an inverter generator," I explained. "Rated at 57 decibels at 25% load, which is what it's running at now. City ordinance limit is 60. I have the spec sheet if you'd like to see it." Miller just stared at me for a second. "You've done your homework." "I'm a big fan of the rules," I said with a completely straight face. He moved on, inspecting the hitch, the tires, the license plate. He had Davis run the plate. It came back clean. My registration was valid, my insurance was paid up. There were no warrants for my arrest for the crime of excessive cooling. "All right," Miller said, walking back over to me. He gestured for his partner to join him. "Your vehicle is legally parked. It's registered. It's not making excessive noise. As far as I can tell, you're not breaking any laws." He paused, then looked me dead in the eye. "So what's really going on here?" I glanced over at Mrs. Gable, who was watching the exchange with wide, anxious eyes. "It's 104 degrees out, officer," I said simply. "Our neighbor's AC is broken. The HOA president shut down the little tent they set up in the park over there. So I provided an alternative?" Miller's gaze shifted to the park, then back to the trailer. The weary mask on his face cracked for just a second, and a hint of understanding, maybe even sympathy, shone through. He'd seen this movie before. He turned to face the street, where Brenda was now standing on her porch, watching the proceedings with an eagle eye. He raised his voice just enough to carry. "Ma'am, there are no laws being broken here. This is a civil matter." Brenda shouted something back that I couldn't quite make out, but it sounded angry and involved the word unacceptable. Miller just shook his head and turned back to me. "Look, son," he said, lowering his voice. "I get it. You get it. But she's going to keep calling. Do me a favor and try to keep it civil. Don't give her any ammunition." "Wouldn't dream of it, officer," I said. He nodded, the weary mask firmly back in place. "All right, then." He and Davis walked back to their car. As Davis got in the passenger side, he caught my eye and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of respect before schooling his features back into neutrality. They drove off, leaving behind a cloud of victory and wonderfully chilled air. The residents, who had been holding a collective breath, broke into quiet, relieved applause. George clapped me on the back. "Round one goes to the engineer." Defeated on the legal front, Brenda resorted to the modern suburbanite's weapon of last resort, the passive-aggressive neighborhood-wide email. It arrived in my inbox the next morning, with the subject line, "Concerning the mobile nuisance on Elm Street." It was a masterpiece of the form. "Dear residents of Maple Creek Estates, it has come to the attention of the HOA board that a large, heavily modified recreational vehicle has taken up semi-permanent residence on Elm Street. While we all appreciate ingenuity and the spirit of community, we must also be mindful of the standards and safety that make our neighborhood a premier living destination. This unapproved vehicle, with its industrial attachments and continuous generator usage, presents a number of potential concerns, including unvetted electrical modifications, potential noise pollution during evening hours, and a significant deviation from the approved aesthetic of our community. The presence of such a vehicle may also have unforeseen impacts on our property values. We are a community of rules, and these rules exist to protect all of us. The board is currently exploring all available options within our covenants, conditions, and restrictions to amicably resolve this situation and restore the intended tranquility of our neighborhood. Thank you for your understanding. Cordially, Brenda Maxwell, President, Maple Creek Estates HOA. I read it twice. Mobile nuisance. Unforeseen impacts on our property values. It was brilliant. She was painting me as some kind of rogue Mad Max character, a tech bro, importing city chaos into their pristine suburban bubble. She was trying to turn the neighborhood against me through fear and snobbery. I leaned back in my chair, the email glowing on my laptop screen. My first instinct was anger. My second, and much more powerful instinct, was inspiration. She thought it was a nuisance now? She thought it wasn't permanent enough? Oh, I could fix that. I picked up my phone and Googled local contractors. The first result with a 5-star rating was Sal's Concrete and Landscaping. No job too weird. Perfect. Sal was a man built like a refrigerator, with a thick neck and hands that looked like they could crush coconuts. He arrived in a dusty Ford F-250 and surveyed the scene with a skeptical eye. He looked at the trailer, then at me, a skinny engineer in cargo shorts. "You're Alex?" he asked, his voice a gravelly baritone. "I'm Alex. You're Sal?" "That's what the truck says," he grunted. "Your message said you had a unique landscaping project." "That's one word for it," I said. I led him to the grassy verge between the curb and the sidewalk, the no-man's land where my trailer was parked. "So, here's what I'm thinking. I want to make this spot look more official, more permanent. Just to, enhance the community." Sal raised a skeptical eyebrow. "I want you to build a perfect, level gravel pad right here," I continued, gesturing to the area. "Top-grade crushed granite. Then frame it with some nice paver stones, like a semi-permanent docking station, if you will, a place where a community asset can reside. Sal stared at me for a long, silent moment. He looked at my face, then at the climate trailer, then at the house across the street where Brenda was pretending to trim her rose bushes while very obviously spying on us. He connected the dots with the speed of a seasoned professional who had seen all manner of human folly. "So, let me get this straight," he said, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You're paying me good money to landscape a patch of public grass? For your spite trailer?" "It's a community-focused, thermally regulated mobile asset," I corrected him gently. "And yes?" Sal let out a booming laugh that startled a nearby squirrel. "I love it," he roared. "I've built waterfall grottos for guys with more money than sense and installed pudding greens for dudes who hate their wives, but this is art. When do you want to start? Is tomorrow too soon?" "My crew will be here at 8 a.m. sharp," Sal promised, shaking my hand with a grip that nearly pulverized it. "We'll make this the best-looking, non-regulation community asset docking station this town has ever seen." The sight of Sal's crew arriving the next morning was glorious. The roar of a bobcat skid steer, the rhythmic clang of shovels, the shouts of men at work. It was a symphony of progress. They scraped away the sad, sun-scorched turf, laid down landscaping fabric, and began spreading tons of beautiful, clean, crushed granite. They worked with the efficiency of a pit crew. And by noon, they were laying the final course of elegant charcoal-gray paver stones around the perimeter. It looked fantastic. It looked deliberate. It looked, to my immense satisfaction, incredibly permanent. Brenda watched from her window, her silhouette a rigid statue of fury. Her next move was predictable. That evening, another email went out. An emergency HOA meeting was called for the following night at the community clubhouse. The agenda was a single item: the unsanctioned development and continuing nuisance on Elm Street. The clubhouse was a stuffy, beige room that smelled of old coffee and quiet desperation. The air was thick with tension. Every folding chair was taken. The room was clearly divided. On one side sat Brenda's loyalists, a handful of stern-faced sycophants who nodded at everything she said. On the other side sat the beneficiaries of the climate trailer. The young families, a few other elderly residents, and a smattering of people who just seemed to be enjoying the drama. In the middle was the silent, nervous majority, the people who hated Brenda but were too afraid to cross her. Brenda stood at a lectern at the front of the room, next to a projector screen. She tapped a microphone, which squealed in protest. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "We are facing a situation that threatens the very fabric of our community." On the screen, a picture of my trailer appeared. It was a grainy, poorly lit photo taken at night, making it look as menacing as possible. "This structure," she said, gesturing to the screen, "appeared on our street 3 days ago. It has since been joined by an unauthorized construction project on public land." A new slide appeared, showing Sal's beautiful paver stone pad. "This individual," she continued, not using my name, "has taken it upon himself to flout our rules, create an eyesore, and establish what can only be described as a renegade encampment." She went on for 10 minutes, presenting a slideshow of her evidence. She talked about precedent, anarchy, and the slippery slope. If they allowed this, what was next? People running businesses from their driveways? Farm animals? It was a masterclass in fear-mongering. When she finally finished, she crossed her arms. "The board proposes an immediate and severe fine for every day the vehicle remains, and a formal demand to the city to have it towed. All in favor?" Her loyalists' hands shot up, but before she could declare victory, A quiet voice spoke from the back. "I'd like to say something." All heads turned. It was Mrs. Gable, standing slowly, her hands gripping the back of the chair in front of her for support. "Brenda," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "That renegade encampment is the only reason I haven't had a heat stroke this week. My air conditioner is broken. I'm 82 years old. I sat under your tent in the park for 20 minutes, and it was a godsend. You took that away. That young man," she pointed a shaky finger at me, "brought it back. What you call an eyesore, I call a kindness. A big, loud, wonderful kindness." A murmur went through the crowd. Another woman, a young mother I'd seen at the trailer with her 2 kids, stood up. "My son has asthma," she said. "He can't play outside when it's this hot and humid, but the misters on that trailer, he's been able to run around for the first time in a week. It's not a nuisance, it's a blessing." Then George stood up, holding a thin, old-looking pamphlet. "I'd just like to read something for everyone," he said in his calm, professorial voice. He put on his reading glasses. "This is from the original 1968 mission statement of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association, written long before any of us, except me, lived here." He cleared his throat. "The primary purpose of this association shall be to promote the health, safety, and welfare of the residents, and to foster a spirit of community and good fellowship among them." He looked up, peering over his glasses directly at Brenda. "Brenda, I ask you, which of those goals are you serving by trying to fine a man for keeping his elderly neighbors safe? Which part of good fellowship involves shutting down a cooling station in 100-degree heat?" The room was silent for a moment, and then it erupted. People started talking all at once. The silent majority was no longer silent. They had found their voice. The meeting descended into chaos. Brenda banged a flimsy gavel on the lectern, but it was no use. She had lost control. No vote was taken. The meeting was adjourned in a storm of shouting and recriminations. It was a moral victory, but I knew Brenda wasn't done. A cornered animal is a dangerous one, and I had just backed the queen of the HOA into a very public corner. She would be scouring that binder, page by page, line by line, looking for the one silver bullet that could end this. And I knew she wouldn't stop until she found it. For 2 days, there was an uneasy peace. The climate trailer continued its benevolent humming, the gravel pad gleamed in the sun, and the neighborhood felt different. People were talking to each other more. George hosted an impromptu potluck under the trailer's awning. It felt like a real community. Brenda was nowhere to be seen, which was more unnerving than her constant presence. It was the silence of a predator stalking its prey. The blow came on the 3rd day. I went out to refill the generator's gas tank and saw it. A crisp, white envelope taped to the trailer's door. It wasn't a handwritten note. It was a formal business envelope, with the name of a downtown law firm printed in the corner. My heart sank a little. This was it, the silver bullet. I tore it open. It was a formal, multi-page cease and desist letter, filled with impenetrable legalese. But I skipped past the whereases and heretofores to the operative clause, the one Brenda had finally unearthed. And there it was, in cold black ink. She hadn't found an obscure HOA bylaw. She'd been simpler and far more clever. She'd found a city ordinance that the HOA had incorporated by reference into its own rules decades ago. City of Maple Creek Municipal, Code 10.24.110. Parking for more than 72 hours. No person shall park or leave, standing any vehicle, including a recreational vehicle, on any public street or highway for a period of 72 or more consecutive hours. It was a standard boilerplate ordinance that exists in thousands of towns across the country. designed to prevent people from abandoning junker cars. It was also completely, unambiguously enforceable. The letter stated that as of 9 a.m. that morning, my trailer had been in the same spot for over 72 hours. I was in violation. If the vehicle was not moved within 24 hours, the HOA would begin levying a fine of $500 per day, as per their enforcement schedule. Furthermore, failure to pay said fines would result in a lien being placed on my property. It was all there, signed by a lawyer whose name had 3 Roman numerals after it. She had me, dead to rights. I could move the trailer every 71 hours, but that was a ridiculous solution. I'd have to drive it around the block and repark it, all while she watched, clock in hand, ready to call the city's parking enforcement the second I slipped up. It was a war of attrition I couldn't win. With a heavy heart, I walked over to the generator and killed the engine. The giant AC units spun down with a final, mournful sigh. The misters hissed to a stop. Silence descended, and with it, the oppressive, smothering heat returned almost instantly. The magical bubble of cold air popped, gone as if it had never been. It felt like a surrender. It felt like a funeral. Brenda had won. That evening, I was sitting in my dark garage, staring at the cease and desist letter, feeling well and truly defeated. George came over, a grim look on his face. A few minutes later, Sal's F-250 pulled up. He'd heard the news through the neighborhood grapevine. "Don't you dare tell me she beat you with a parking ticket," Sal boomed as he walked in, holding a bag from a local barbecue joint. "I brought brisket. It's good for morale." We sat there on upturned buckets, the smell of smoked meat mixing with the oil and metal of the garage. I explained the 72-hour rule. "It's brilliant in a sociopathic sort of way," I admitted. "I can't fight a city ordinance. I have to move it. But the second I move it back, the clock starts again. She can harass me forever." "You could park it in your driveway," George suggested. "Can't," I said, shaking my head. HOA Bylaw 8.2a. No recreational vehicles to be parked in driveways for more than 24 hours, and they can't be visible from the street. My driveway is very visible. This woman has thought of everything," Sal muttered around a mouthful of brisket. "It's like she's playing 4D chess, and we're all playing checkers." We sat in silence for a while, the mood as grim as the unlit garage. This was it. The end of the rebellion. I'd have to move the trailer, probably store it somewhere, and my beautiful, spite-fueled gravel pad would just be a weird scar on the neighborhood. Then, George, the historian, sat bolt upright. His eyes, which had been staring into the middle distance, suddenly focused. A spark ignited within them. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Wait. Minute?" Sal and I both looked at him. "The park," George said, his voice growing stronger. "I remember when the developer, Old Man Thompson, dedicated this land to the city back in '68. It was a whole thing in the local paper. He was a big believer in public spaces. There was a covenant, I'm sure of it, a legal agreement tied to the deed itself." "A covenant?" I asked, leaning forward. "Yes." George was on his feet now, pacing the garage. "It stipulated that the land must always be available for public recreation and community betterment. It was a condition of the land grant to the city. That covenant predates the HOA by a decade. The HOA doesn't control the park, Alex. The city does, and the city is bound by that original covenant." My brain, which had been sputtering and stalled, roared back to life. The gears began to turn, meshing with George's revelation. He was right. The HOA's authority ended at the curb. The street was governed by city parking ordinances, but the park itself, the park was a different legal entity entirely. "Sal," I said, turning to the contractor, a wild, brilliant idea blooming in my mind. What are the rules for a temporary event structure on city parkland? Sal's eyes widened as he caught on. Different world, my friend. Totally different world. You get a park use permit, it's not a vehicle anymore. It's part of a sanctioned event. The 72-hour parking rule doesn't apply. A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. It felt like the sun coming out. George, are you sure about that covenant? I'd bet my pension on it, he declared. First thing tomorrow, we're going down to the county records office. The plan was audacious. It was beautiful. It was the Hail Mary pass we needed. We weren't just going to move the trailer. We were going to give it a promotion. The next morning was a whirlwind of activity. George and I were at the county records office when it opened. It took an hour of digging through dusty microfilm records, but we found it. The original 1968 deed for the parkland, with the Public Recreation and Community Betterment Covenant clear as day. I paid for a dozen certified copies. Meanwhile, Sal was on the phone with his contact at the city's Parks and Recreation Department. He explained the situation, framed our little operation as a community wellness and heat relief event, and discovered that for a single-day event with no sales and no amplified music, all we needed was a simple over-the-counter park use permit. He got one emailed to him within the hour. The final piece of the puzzle was logistics. We couldn't just drive the trailer onto the grass. We needed to move it with care. We were, after all, benevolent occupiers. By 3 p.m., Operation Arctic Freedom was a go. Sal's crew returned, this time with sheets of thick plywood to create a temporary road across the curb and onto the grass. Word had spread, and a dozen neighbors came out to help. It was a beautiful sight. With a coordinated effort, we pushed the massive trailer off the street, across the plywood path, and onto the park grass, positioning it right in the center. We didn't stop there. We unrolled a huge piece of green artificial turf and placed it under the trailer, making it look like it was floating on its own private lawn. We hammered in stakes and strung up a professionally printed vinyl banner that Sal had rush-ordered. It read, "The Maple Creek Estates Community Wellness Event." We set up a guest book on a small table. We were no longer a rogue trailer. We were an official event. The generator roared back to life. The ACs kicked on. The misting system hissed. The oasis was back, bigger and better than ever. It took exactly 7 minutes for Brenda to appear. She must have had a motion sensor trained on my trailer, but this time she wasn't alone. She was on the phone, and as she marched toward us, the white patrol car with Miller and Davis pulled up, its lights silently flashing. "That's it!" Brenda shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the trailer as the officers got out of their car. "He's on the park! He's trespassing! Destruction of HOA common property! Arrest him!" Officer Miller looked at the scene. He looked at the trailer on the grass, the banner, the happy families already gathering. He looked at me. His expression was one of infinite, soul-crushing weariness. He looked like a man who had been condemned to relive the same stupid day for eternity. "Sir," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "What are you doing now?" Brenda was right behind him. "He's destroying the lawn. This is common land. I demand you remove him." I smiled calmly and handed Officer Miller a clear plastic folder. "Officer," I said, "in this folder you will find a certified copy of the 1968 City Deed and Public Use Covenant for this park land. You will also find a valid park use permit for a community wellness event, issued by the city's Parks and Recreation Department, effective today. As you can see, this is a sanctioned public event on city land for the betterment of the community." I gestured to the guest book. "Would you like to sign in? Mrs. Gable brought cookies." Miller took the folder. He opened it. He read the permit first, his eyes scanning the official letterhead. Then he read the certified copy of the 1968 Covenant. He read it once, then he read it again, slowly. A long, silent moment passed. He looked up from the paper, his gaze moving from me to the trailer, to the crowd, and finally to Brenda, who was vibrating with impatience. He let out the biggest, deepest, most profound sigh I had ever heard. It was a sigh that contained the weight of 1,000 pointless suburban disputes, 1,000 petty arguments over trash cans and lawn gnomes. It was the sigh of a man who had finally reached the end of the line. He handed the folder back to me. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Brenda, his voice as flat and final as a tombstone. "This document appears to put this land squarely under city jurisdiction. The permit appears to be valid. Any complaint you have is a civil matter with the City of Maple Creek Parks and Recreation Department, not a police issue." He took a step back, creating a physical distance between himself and her madness. "We can't ask them to leave. There are no laws being broken here." He turned to his partner. "Davis, let's go." But, you can't!" Brenda sputtered, her face collapsing in disbelief. "The bylaws! The rules!" Officer Miller paused at his car door and looked back at her, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am," he said, "this is a park. It's 104 degrees. People are happy. Go home." And with that, they got in their car and drove away, leaving Brenda standing alone on the grass. She was checkmated, publicly and legally outmaneuvered. She stood there, silent and sputtering, completely defeated, surrounded by the cool, happy community she had tried so desperately to control. It was the sweetest, coldest victory I had ever tasted. The heat wave broke a few days later, but the climate in Maple Creek Estates had been permanently altered. Brenda's reign of terror was over. Her authority had evaporated in the face of public opinion and a 57-year-old legal document. George's petition to have her recalled as HOA president was a landslide victory. He was nominated to take her place, and he accepted on the condition that his first official act would be to form a committee to drastically simplify the bylaws. The climate trailer became something of a local legend. I worked with the city to create a simple, official framework for a community heat relief program, using my trailer as the prototype. We founded a small nonprofit, and with some local donations, we bought and retrofitted 2 more trailers for other neighborhoods in town. Life settled into a new, more pleasant normal. The oppressive beige cloud of Brenda's rule had lifted. People smiled more. They stopped to chat. The neighborhood felt like a neighborhood. Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I was out in my front yard, raking the golden leaves of the maple tree that gave our street its name. I saw Brenda walking on the other side of the street. She was alone. Sir Reginald, her poodle, had apparently been rehomed with her sister in another state. She was smaller now, stripped of her authority and her binder. She saw me. Our eyes met across the asphalt. There was no apology in her look, no remorse, just a quiet, simmering, eternal hatred. I gave her a cheerful little wave. She just stared for a moment longer, then turned and continued her walk, a ghost haunting the streets of her former kingdom. They say good fences make good neighbors. That might be true, but I've learned that sometimes, when faced with a ridiculous, tyrannical problem, the best solution is a ridiculously brilliant one. And, as I watched her disappear around the corner, I couldn't help but smile. The first snow was in the forecast for next month, and I had a new idea rattling around in my head. I was thinking of a winter version of the trailer, heated benches, a commercial-grade hot cocoa dispenser, and enough wattage to power the entire neighborhood's Christmas lights. Brenda was gonna love it.